Chapter 15. They heard Bert Schoonover calling to someone beyond in the meadow. "Get down to the house, Al, and ask Father to ride up here." The shout drifted across the trees. "That'll be Macy's after," Sam said. "You ought to meet him anyways, Pat. He's quite the character, that old tarpon is." "Then you don't find these Mormons as bad as they're painted, then?" Pat murmured. "Bad?" Sam was indignant. "Why, they're the salt of the earth. Wait till Schoonover gets over here." Ezra came up while they were waiting. He grinned at Pat and squinted in Clay's direction with curiosity. "Ain't aiming to pinch me and Sam for lifting your stock, are you, Marble?" he joked. "Well, not just now," Clay returned dryly. "As it matters stands, you both are under a cloud, Ezra." He briefly related his own experience in Castlegate and its events while the grizzled partners listened open-mouthed. "So you up and join the rest of us unworthy blacklegs in the loyal order of lawbreakers, eh?" Ezra chuckled with a unstinted approval of Esther. Tisk, what's things coming to nowadays?" Wondering the same thing herself, but in a different sense, the girl only smiled. A thud and a crack of hoofs drifted to them from down the canyon as they waited. The messenger was returning with Mace Schoonover, and Pat saw a tall, rugged, patriarchal form astride a horse of massive proportions. The Mormon leader advanced deliberately, eyeing them keenly. His face went cold and expressionless as iron at sight of Clay. "Schoonover, our mission here, it is friendly." Pat pushed forward, introducing himself forthright. "Before I go any further, I ask you not to get false impressions of Doc Marble's son being here today. I brought him for an excellent reason, but first I want to make sure whether you got all the news." "Go on, Stevens," Schoonover rumbled with remote dignity. "Do you know what happened yesterday to your neighbor, Press Moon?" Pat queried bluntly. "Well, I know a dozen or more plumb bob gunmen smashed into Apache Cache under protest from my sons and others, and then went on to Axe Head Canyon," Mace acknowledged. "I've heard no more, but I fear the worst." Pat told how Moon had been dispossessed and thrown off his ranch. "You see what that means, Schoonover? It looks very much like the entering of a wedge of a deep plan to drive you out of the canyons. Strangely enough, I doubt that Doc Marble's behind it, though." He added a tense account of the meeting with Billy the Kid and the discovery that Marble was being held prisoner by the outlaw. Schoonover shook his bearded head at the end. "That's too bad," he rolled out. "The Lord moves in mysterious ways, Stevens. Dachshund Marble is a strong-headed, violent man, but I never held him to be our bitterest enemy." Pat studied the prophet-like face attentively. "You don't?" "No." Schoonover's denial held a convincing roll. "Edward Gurley is the arch foe to my people. Despite his humble cant, his treacherous actions have proved him so. Jehovah protect us from the mouthing hypocrite, Stevens. Edward Gurley, he's a scoundrel. I say so with reluctance, yet I know I am not mistaken." "I'm inclined to agree with you, Schoonover," Pat nodded. "Gurley signed the eviction order against Press Moon and gave me an evasive excuse for his reasons. I know that much." "Well, you know the truth, then. Doc Marble's greatest sin is the sin of indifference. Edward Gurley has directed his business for years, given his orders in his name, practically runs the great Plum Bob Ranch. Does he own it not, then? No matter. He rules there. It is Gurley who decided to drive us out of our homes and now he has begun the devil's work." In the discussion that followed, Pat learned that May Schoonover had a greater grasp of realities than he had supposed. The dignified Mormon, an elder in his church, had no expectation of taking Gurley's move laying down, yet it posed a thorny problem. "I refuse to desert my friend Moon in his extremity," Mace declared finally. "God tempers the wind, but what can a man do? Just now, Stevens, I'm wrestling with the terrible urge to violence that manifested by my sons. Resort to arms can never produce good." "That's my notion precisely," Pat agreed. "But I have an idea, Schoonover, that may get Press Moon off the hook and avoid any rough stuff in the same time. If it is in fact Gurley, then we can't buck him. We'll just have to trip him up and circle around." Mace looked at him with new respect. "And your plan, Stevens?" Pat outlined it, and in the process of taking it apart, everyone present had a word to say. Not all were wholly in favor, but no better plan was being presented. It was finally adopted. Pat turned to Esther. "Looks like you and I'll have to get back to town in a hurry. We may be able to reach your dad before he lands himself into hot water," he told her. "Don't forget, Schoonover, I expect to find the 7-hook cattle in the cache when they're needed, and I'll undertake to clear your sons of any charges. We'll pull Moon and the rest of Apache Cache out of this for yet." "It's just possible," May Schoonover stated his simple conviction in a courtly manner, "that the Lord has sent you here for this very purpose, Stevens. I'm glad to have made your acquaintance. Your heart declares that you're a good man." 10 minutes later, Pat and Esther were on their way down the canyon and through the cache in the direction of Castle Gate. They rode hard, and soon after midday were to be seen entering the upper end of town. Jake Starbuck hailed Pat from the doorway in his store. "Just in time, Stevens, you and Esther," he breathed in relief at their appearance. "Press showed up this morning, ranting and demanding blood. I dragged him in here to keep an eye on him, but I'm about the end of my string." They found Moon sitting in Starbuck's office, deeply dejected. He looked up when Esther threw an arm over his shoulders, but couldn't pull himself out of his gloom. "Get up your hocks, Moon," Pat told him cheerfully. "We're aiming to claim the axe head again today, and you'll be busy." Press sprang up, staring. The blood rushed to his face. "You're fooling me now, Stevens," he gulped. "It's no gag," Pat insisted. "Esther and I located the 7-hook beef, and we're turning it over to Plum Bob, and we're pushing him out. But we'll need your help." "Goffrey!" A load visibly slid off Press's back. "Well, what's the first move?" "Well, we'll pick up Sheriff Elmy for a witness," Pat said levelly, "and then we'll go over and brace Ed Gurley first. I want to watch his face." But Moon's stunned mind had begun to work again. He had heard about Clay Marble, and in the midst of his own trials, however, it had not made much of an impression. "Well, hold on. Clay's got a claim on them steers, Stevens," he exclaimed now in dismay. "You're turning him over to the Plum Bob anyway to save me, and dragging the sheriff into it too?" "Oh, don't go hunting grief," Pat advised tolerantly. "We'll know where the steers are at any rate. Let's go pick up Elmy." A scowl settled on Ferd Elmy's face when he looked up from his desk and saw the three of them step into his office at the jail. "What now?" he rasped. "I've no time for hard luck stories. I got troubles of my own." He listened sourly while Pat explained their errand. Busy as he might be, and they could detect no evidence of unusual activity here, he could not reasonably refuse such a request as theirs, but plainly his own problems were nagging at his mind. It had done his reputation no good to lose 2 prisoners in a row, and well he knew it.
It seems to me that you're getting around an awful lot,
he told Press Moon discontentedly.
Wishing I could be sure you and your Mormon friends weren't shielding Clay Marble right now.
Buoyed by hope, Moon was almost cocky.
Well, you're entitled to your guess, Almy, he retorted. Shall we get started? Defying me, are you?
Ferd made no move to rise.
I got a mind to slap a charge of fraud on you to show you your place. Is this some kind of joke?
Press snorted.
Passing them beeves on to the Mormons, didn't you?
Ferd snapped.
If Conklin hadn't called your bluff, Doc Marble could have been whistling for his money.
Oh, can it, Almy? That won't wash, Pat told him shortly. I told you myself what happened at Clay's meeting with Bonnie, and Salone told me he suspected as much while we were gone. And Sam moved the steers without Moon's knowledge, and he did right. The lawman's hostile eyes slanted up at him.
I ain't done with you yet neither, Stevens, he growled. You was the last one in the jail here when Marble skipped out. I ain't forgetting that.
And you're suspecting me? Pat laughed his incredibility. I simply brought Esther to see him, Almy. She'll tell you herself that we found that Clay was gone. Would I come back again if I had any hand in his getaway? He succeeded in making the possibility sound kind of foolish.
Well, somebody let him out.
Well, you might as well suspect Bill Bonnie, Pat pointed out in a reasonable tone. That's perfectly possible, too.
The heck it is!
Ferd showed some fire.
Marks never said he seen the kid. He did see you, though.
Well, what of it? If Bonnie warned Jack to keep his mouth shut. Pat chuckled at him shrewdly. Would he or wouldn't he be? The sheriff, growing restless under this heckling, grabbed up his hat and jumped up.
Oh, come on.
We'll get on with this. He led the way to Ed Gurley's office. The bald business agent glanced up as the four gathered before his desk, his lips a thin line. He might have guessed of something what was coming, for his look was sour.
Noon here says he's ready to hand over them 7-hook steers, Gurley.
Almy opened up matter-of-factly.
He wants his ranch back. Well, there's no doubt,
Gurley sneered.
But what can I do? He hasn't the steers in his pocket, I suppose.
Write a notice to Windy Conklin, Pat put in coolly. Tell him it's your wish that he turn Axehead back over to Press Moon in exchange for the stock without argument. You can do that much, Gurley, and Sheriff Almy will see that the letter gets delivered. With Almy's bleak glance resting upon him, Gurley could find no subterfuge handy. There was really no choice for him, strong as the temptation was to refuse. Hesitating only briefly, he drew out a blank sheet of paper and began to write.
It all sounds kind of dodgy, Almy, he muttered severely. If Moon was powerless to produce the cattle before, as he said, he still must be, or else this is an open and shut case of misrepresentation all around.
I know, Ferd nodded ominously. Just keep writing, Ned. I can't drag out of 'em where the steers are, anyway, he added. But I intend to check on this whole business, and meanwhile, I'll see that it goes off without a hitch. Gurley handed the letter over with the worst grace Pat had ever seen him display. It was Press Moon who took charge of it, and he tucked it away carefully.
I'm warning you now, Gurley, he said gruffly. I intend to demand a receipt for that herd when I do hand it over. So don't be sending back your roughnecks to the Axehead, because all they'll get next time is some hot lead. That's enough, Gurley pretended righteous indignation. No law or law, Moon. I won't stand for that kind of talk. You get out of my office and don't be coming back.
Nothing could have revealed more clearly the man's momentarily demoralization at the turn of the events, but Pat didn't bother to point it out. Leading the way now, he walked out of Gurley's office and ran down the steps and made for their horses without ado. A stableman had saddled Almy's mount, and they set off at once. Constraint due to the sheriff's presence held them silent on the long ride, and at last they drew near to Apache Cache, and already the afternoon was waning.
Where are we picking up the steers?
Almy growled. Schoonover promised his sons would meet us here in the cache, Pat responded. They'll have the cattle.
Schoonover, huh?
Ferd eyed him sharply, and Pat spread his hands in mild explanation. I told you Sam went to the Mormons for help. This is their range, Almy. What can you expect? Ferd's thin lips folded over the crowded comments welling in his mind. He had sense enough to close his thoughts to some matters, but those tight lips popped open 10 minutes later when the four passed through the rocky gate into the cache, and he saw cattle scattered out over the western slope, guarded by a number of agile riders. No one attempted to halt them as they rode forward and noted the 7-hook brand. Bert Schoonover pushed his bronc out, with a bare glance at the lawman. Where do you want those stairs, Stevens? He demanded curtly. We'll make delivery right in Axehead Canyon, Pat told him. With Almy here, I don't want any slip-ups. Schoonover whistled and then waved his hand. The Mormon riders began to urge the steers across the cache, and Pat and Press Moon aiding them. Sheriff Almy glanced about warily, his glance going more than once to the log-walled store.
I see that Sloane's here, he grunted. No sign of that long-legged Ezra or Clay Marble neither. Are they hiding out in the canyons?
Go hunt for 'em yourself, Almy, retorted a stalwart Mormon drover. That is, if you think you can get through. He rode away without waiting for Ferd's sputtering fumations. The steers filed into the mouth of Axehead Canyon with a noisy clatter of hoofs and dust rising in billows and drifting through the pines. Press Moon was riding point now, gazing ahead alertly. This was a moment of triumph for him, as his bearing showed. Pat, Esther, and Sheriff Almy stayed near at hand. No one spotted them till they rode out on the bench where Moon had built his ranch. Then a man clattered forward, calling out for them to turn back, and Almy waved him close. Is Conklin here? The lawman queried briefly.
Yeah.
The plumb bob puncher's belligerence subsided at the sight of the sheriff.
Did you want him, Ferd?
Get him out here. The man turned back, and with a remarkably short time he returned, the blustery plumb bob ramrod at his side, dwarfing him by his size. You, huh? Windy gave Press Moon a contemptuous look and turned to Almy. Sorry, Sheriff, but this man's complaints won't get you anywhere. We've took over Axehead for good.
Well, you don't get it,
Ferd told him.
Moon's turning over the 7-hook beef, Conklin.
Too late, Conklin grunted. He forfeited the ranch, I tell you. He can have them steers.
We'll see.
Mouth straight and hard, Almy handed over Gurley's letter.
There's your instructions, Conklin. Straight from headquarters. Read 'em, and then go look after them steers.
A scowl spreading over his lumpy face, the husky ramrod followed Ferd's gesture, glancing to where Schoonover's sons were holding the 7-hook steer on the flats below. It was the last sight that Winley wanted to see. This paper don't mean nothing, he began. Read it, Almy thundered. Conklin wanted desperately to stall. Twice Almy's size and bulk, he could have crushed the other with a single blow. But the star on Ferd's chest gave him pause. Well, no matter what it says here, he snarled angrily, but his eyes jumped at the sight of the signature that was attached to the letter. He read it through, holding it gingerly as if burning even his thick fingers.
If you're satisfied, Press Moon broke in on a sullen abstraction, gather up your plum uglies, Conklin, and get.
Looking up at last, Winley's eyes were ablaze. Clearly he found himself in a cleft stick, ready to defy all comers. He was unable to deny the authenticity and the specific meaning of Gurley's instructions, allowing for no loophole to wiggle through. In exchange for the 7-hook herd, he was to restore Press Moons as the undisputed owner of the Axe Head Ranch. Nothing else could be plainer, and nothing could have gone more directly against the grain for him. I'll gather the boys, and we'll count the stuff. Let you know in the morning.
You'll do nothing of the kind, Conklin, Sheriff Elmy barked. I won't tolerate no more stalling. Get your men together and take charge of this beef, and then make yourself scarce.
After you signed a receipt for this 7-hook beef, that is. Pat thrust in smoothly and firmly. Boiling with helpless rage as he was in, his eyes shooting pure hatred at this man who he had no doubt had caused his downfall here, Conklin found no choice but to obey. End of chapter 15.